In this lecture, we'll be doing a project. We'll be creating a web page using HTML and CSS concepts that we have learned so far. You can find the complete coding of this project in the resources section of this lecture. Okay, let's start. First, we'll look at the web page that we are going to create. We'll look at the output. Okay, here is the web page that we are going to create. All the concepts that we have learned till now have to be applied for doing this project. Okay, now let's go to the Sublime Text Editor and look at the code line by line. In line number 4, we are linking with the external style sheet. If you are working on a project, always it's a good idea to go with external style sheet rather than using internal CSS, because it will be clean and easy to maintain. Next, we have the web page title. Now we are in the body tag. The complete coding of this web page is inside the opening and closing of the body tag. We are going to create this web page in blocks. Okay, so right from top, that is right from line 8 till here, till line number 23, this is one block. In line number 8, we have a div element with some class name. So the class name that I have given is container1. Then you can use whatever class name you want. Under this container1 div, we have headings Swami Vivekananda and other heading elements. Next, we have another div with class name container2. All these classes, container1, container2 and other classes that we will see later, all these classes are styled using external CSS file. We will see that shortly. Inside this container2 div, we have a paragraph element, image and another div, another small div. In the output, did you notice the image is circle in shape? How to get that effect using CSS? We will see that shortly. Next, in line number 25, we are in the next block. We are in second block. In the second block, we have another div container with class name container3. Did you notice? We are using div element often as a container for other elements. Why are we not using P, paragraph element or heading tags as a container? What is the primary difference between div element and other block elements like heading or paragraph? Why are we not using those elements as container? Why only div? So to understand this, I am going to disable the CSS. That is, I am going to comment the external CSS link. And let's go to the output. So now the CSS is disabled and we have the output here without any CSS applied. Now going back to Sublime Text Editor, in line number 12, I am highlighting, we have a heading 3 element, H3 element in line number 12 with some text Indian, Hindu, monk, philosopher, something. So I am going back to the output. See, the text is here, that the line number 12 text is here. For this H3 element, no CSS is applied in our code. So, but it has some styles already applied to it. So let's open the developer tools. I'm highlighting the H3 element on the left. And you can see the associated CSS for this H3 element. Can you see that I'm highlighting the H3 element and we can see the associated CSS for this H3 element on the right side. Did we write the CSS? You know, I have already disabled the CSS for this web page. But from where are we getting the CSS properties for this H3 element? It's appearing by default. All the heading elements and paragraph elements have default pre-written CSS attached to it. See, the CSS property for this H3 element is setting margin, font size, font weight, all those properties. There is another property also called the display. display block. So we will see about display property later, but the point here is for this H3 element already some default CSS properties are already applied. Even though we don't have any CSS in our HTML code, some default CSS properties is already applied to these heading elements. Only because of these CSS properties for H3 element, all these elements are appearing in different sizes. That is, H1 tag creates heading in bigger font, H6 tag creates heading in small font. It is because of the default font size property assigned to the heading elements. Now let's take a div element and see the default CSS for div. I am highlighting div class is equal to container 1. On the right side, if you see, we only have one default property for the div element, that is display block. So we'll see about display property, what is the purpose of display property later. But here, other than the display property, there is no margin, no font size, or no font weight, or any no other properties other than display is set for div. So that is the difference between div and other block elements. Both heading element and div, both are block elements. Even paragraph is also a block element. But the difference between div and other block elements like heading and paragraph is div has very minimal already defined default CSS properties. And because of that, it can be easily customized to our needs. Okay, now let's go back to the code. We are in line number 25. So inside container 3 div, we have another div with class name timeline. This is another div with class name timeline. And inside the timeline div, we have an unordered list. And below this timeline div, we have another small div with some text that is emphasized using emphasis tag. Here, throughout the code, we have parent-child hierarchy. We can see this container 3 div is the parent for this timeline div. That is, this timeline div and this small div are children of this container 3. Okay, so how do we know this? So for example, if the code is written like this, then it will be very difficult to read. We do not understand which one is the children of which div. So what is the parent-child hierarchy? It will be very difficult to understand. This code will run, we will get the output, but it will be very difficult to read. Right, read and understand, and it's we can easily make mistake. So indentation is very important in HTML code. So indentation means that code has to be written with necessary spacing to show the parent-child hierarchy. That means I am going to indent this div inside the container element. So we know that the class name timeline is the child of this container 3 div, and similarly I am going to indent this part. So now it's very easy to read. We know that this H3 and unordered list are children of this timeline div. And I'm going to indent this li elements inside ul. So we know that all these li elements are children of ul. And similarly, this div I'm going to indent a bit. And this emphasis tag I'm going to indent a bit. Okay. So it's very important to use proper indentation throughout the code. Now container 3 div is complete. Now going to footer tag. In line number 49 we have the footer tag. So what is a footer? There are other tags like footer, header, section, article. Just like footer we have other tags like header, section, article. All these tags are block elements and they are very similar to div. That is very similar to div in the sense they have only display CSS property defined. That is display property set to block. No other default CSS properties are defined. So only display property is set for all these block elements like header, footer, section and article. Then why do we need to use header or footer instead of div if it's just similar to div? It's because of the code readability. When we use footer tag in the bottom part, anybody reading through the code can understand that this is the footer part of the web page. We can also use a div here. the output is going to be same. It's not going to affect the output. So here instead of line number 49, I can use a div and we don't see any change in the output. But using the footer tag, it's just for readability. Now the HTML part of this web page is complete. I'm going to enable the external CSS and we look at the CSS part. We save this and I'm going to CSS file. We have already seen almost all the CSS properties used here. Background color, padding, color, margin, all those properties. I'm just going to cover a few important properties that we have not seen. First is border radius. So in line number 10, we have border radius property. So let's go to the output and open developer tools. So I have the developer tools already open. And let me refresh the page because I have enabled the CSS, right? Okay. And I'm just right clicking on this image and clicking on inspect so that it will take me to the image element directly. Yeah, here is the image element. Now for this image element, we have class name given as tricircle, and on the right side for this class selector, we can see two properties associated with it, border radius and border. So let me uncheck the border radius property. Now see how the output looks like. So now we can understand what the border radius property is doing. It is giving a circular effect, right? This border radius property takes value both in pixels and percentage. So if we give the value in pixels, I'm going to change the 60% to 40 pixels or something. Now you can see here this image has a rounded border. This image is not completely circle, but it has rounded border. If we want to get circular image, then we have to give the value in percentage. So I'm going to change this value back to 60%. Next I'm highlighting div class is equal to container1. I'm highlighting the container1 div. And on the right side we can see the associated CSS for container1 div. So we know about the background color property. So when I highlight this container1 div, you can see what is getting highlighted in the web page. So this container1 div is for block 1, right? So you can see this block 1 completely is getting highlighted. So container1 is completely getting highlighted, and this container1 has CSS property background color, which we know what background color property does. And next is we have text align center. So this text align property works only with block element, and it takes values left, right, center and justify. Inside this container1 div, we have a heading, and we have some h2 elements with some year value. And then we have a h3 text. Now I am highlighting container 3 div, second block, container 3 div. See, I have repositioned the developer tools to show on the right side. So if you want to reposition, you can use these 3 dots. So for better visibility, I have moved the developer tools on the right side. That is the developer tools code on the right side. So now when I highlight place the mouse on this container 3, you can see the div element getting highlighted. So we have inside container 3, we have this timeline, this heading and unordered list. So everything is inside this container 3 div. So this timeline div is the parent of this unordered list. And here for each li item, when I highlight on this li item, you can see here we have line height 40 pixels. So if I uncheck this, you can see everything is cramped together. So if I enable this property, we can see a gap. So this line height property determines the line spacing. So you can see the difference by unchecking and checking this property, right? Line height disabled, enabled. And next to this container 3, inside this container 3, one child is timeline and the next child is another div, another small div with text that is emphasized. And next we have footer. So I am highlighting footer here. You can see on the bottom part footer, and for the footer you can also see the CSS. It's standard CSS, background color, text align, padding, everything. Okay, so I think you'll be pretty much comfortable with the other CSS properties in the CSS file. So all these we have already seen in the previous lectures. So if you have any doubts, please feel free to email me in the email ID provided in the course description. I'll be happy to help you. Okay, see you in the next lecture. In the next lecture, we'll be looking at CSS gradients and shadow effects. Thank you.